Alright, so now we will see with regard to the questions from SA 600 using the work of another auditor. The first question is, what factors will you consider while accepting the position of the principal auditor? So the question is for the principal auditor. So what will we consider before taking up the position as the principal auditor? Alright, so we should check if the auditor's own participation is sufficient to able to act as a principal auditor. For this purpose, we should consider four things. What are the four things? Materiality of the portion of the financial information which the principal auditor audits. So materiality of the portion. Then degree of knowledge relating to the business of the component. So materiality of the portion and ourselves, degree of the knowledge. Then risk of material misstatement in the financial statement. So in that, what is the risk of material misstatement in the financial portion, and for that, what are the additional procedures which is set out in the SA regarding the component. So materiality of the portion which we are going to audit. For that, what is the degree of knowledge that we have, then the risk of material misstatement, and for that what additional procedures is required. All these things should be checked. Materiality, degree of knowledge, risk of material misstatement, and for that additional procedures which is to be performed. Okay, now next, what procedures should be performed so that the auditor obtains sufficient appropriate audit evidence to ensure that the work of the other auditor is adequate. So principal auditor, what he should do to ensure that the work of the other auditor is adequate. Okay, right, so this is with regard to checking the work of the other auditor. So what and all he should do? Firstly, advise the other auditor regarding use of his work and report and make sufficient arrangement for coordination. So firstly, there should be coordination at the planning stage, because there are two auditors involved. There should be coordination at the planning stage. The principal auditor would inform the other auditor of the matter. So principal auditor would have knowledge of certain thing, and he should share. What he should share? Areas which require special consideration. Then what procedures is to be done for identification of intercomponent transaction. Then timetable for the completion. It's mostly like the nature, scope, and timing. So nature is that what is the procedure, scope is that area, and the timetable. So TAP, he should see timetable, areas which is requiring a special audit consideration, and the procedures for identification of the intercomponent transaction. All these should be done. Next, advice we should give. So firstly coordination, then TAP, then advice regarding the what advice, accounting, auditing, reporting requirement, all these things advice he should give. Clear? Talking about the second part of the question, they are asking what should be documented if the other auditor's report is modified. So there is a modified opinion in that. So what and all they should be documenting. So what and all they did, all those things they should be documenting. Procedures performed, conclusion reached. This should be documented. Procedures and conclusion. Clear? Fine. And result of discussion also return summary. So what we did, procedures, conclusion, then discussion, summary outside. Then whether the other auditor's report is other than unmodified. Okay, the principal auditor should document how he dealt with the qualification and the adverse opinion. So if it is unmodified, okay, we will not mention about that. But if it is other than unmodified, then what the principal auditor done with regard to those modifications should also be included. Okay, now moving on to the next question. Role of a principal auditor. So what the principal auditor should do? So already we saw they should be coordinating. Next, TAP should be there. So timetable, addition, and what are the areas which require the special audit consideration. Then P for procedures for identification of the intercomponent transaction, the principal auditor will tell. Now, what is the role of the principal auditor? So he will issue written communication. Okay, then he will give advice for what audit, accounting, all those things. For that he will give the advice. Okay, then he will also give the questionnaire. So he will give communication, advice, then he will give the questionnaire. Okay, so this the principal auditor will do. What the other auditor will do, firstly he should cooperate with that, and cooperate with the principal auditor, so that it is being time bound, with regard to the timetable, with regard to the areas which need a special consideration, and with regard to the procedures which should be followed for identification of the intercomponent transactions. And with all these things he should cooperate. Then next, CC. So he is sending everything, so he should do CC. We'll have no mail CC. So coordinate and ensure compliance with the relevant statutory requirement. So there should be compliance with the requirement. And whenever he is sending the questionnaire, that questionnaire also he should respond. So all these things is to be done with regard to the side from the other auditor. Okay. Now moving on to the next question. So this question asks, for the purpose of audit of consolidated financial statements, either his firm is required to conduct an audit of all the components, or he needs the working papers of the component auditor. So the statutory auditor is telling, should his firm do the audit, or he can just get the working papers of the component auditor. Alright, let's see what is to be done. So normally the principal auditor is entitled to rely on the work of the component auditor unless there are certain exceptional circumstances which is telling that he should not he should examine the books of the component. Alright, and the principal auditor might discuss with the other auditor the audit procedure, what he did, and summary what he did. All these things he will do. And sometimes the principal auditor may also wish to visit the other auditor. So normally he is entitled to rely on the work of the component auditor unless there are special circumstances. Then the principal auditor might also discuss with the other auditor what procedures he applied, and what he will also get the summary of it. Sometimes he will also visit, so he will see the procedures, or he will get the summary, or he will go and visit. So discuss the procedure, get the summary, so oral, written, and see, go and visit them. All those things he can do. And all these will depend upon the nature, timing, extent of the procedures, and the professional competency of the other auditor. Based on that, he will do any of these things. Discussion here, or seeing the summary, or going, or discussion, or reviewing the summary, or going and visiting in person. So all these things he will do. Then based should consider the finding. So he should see the finding, and he should discuss with the other auditor and also the management. Okay, after doing all these things, he may decide that supplemental test is required for the same. Okay, supplemental test might be required. If he feels that it is required, he might perform the supplemental test. All right. So the contention that he is required to conduct the audit of the component, it is not correct. He don't have to conduct the audit of the components and all, right? It is not required also. And SQC 1 and SA 230 with regard to documentation is telling that the audit documentation is a property of the auditor. Okay, so he may at his discretion make extracts of the portion made available to the client, but it should be in such a manner that it does not undermine the validity of the work and the independence of the auditor. So it is the discretion of the competent auditor, as the working paper is his property, right? So it is his discretion only. So he can share. If he wants to share, he can share. Yeah, but it is not required that the principal auditor is required to conduct the audit of the component. Okay, so that is that question. Moving on to the next question. So here this question is with regard to the statutory audit of a bank. So the statutory auditor, he has called for certain soft copies of the internal inspection report and the concurrent audit report of the branches, and however these reports did not point out any irregularity. Now, would the statutory auditor be liable if there are any lapses is the question. Firstly, whenever a work is delegated to the other auditor, he is not responsible. So the principal auditor is not responsible in respect of the work entrusted to the other auditor, except in cases where there is a suspicion arisen in regard to that. Right? And he should clearly state in his report that the division of responsibility is there, and you should also mention the extent of the division of the responsibility. All right. Now, whenever any work is performed by the branch auditor, the principal auditor will not be responsible for the work of the branch auditor if there is no suspicion arisen that there is no if there is any suspicion, there is no suspicion arising, that we should not rely on it. Okay, unless there is a suspicion that is arising, we can go and rely on it. This is with regard to SA 600. Thank you.